The air over Earth had never felt heavier. The planet, once teeming with life and possibility, now languished in the slow, inevitable decay brought on by centuries of environmental neglect. The oceans, once vast and nourishing, had shrunk into bitter, polluted puddles. The cities that sprawled across the continents were little more than crumbling shells of their former selves. The few remaining ecosystems were dying, suffocated by the toxic air that covered the earth like a shroud. In the heart of what remained of New York City, the remnants of the United Earth Council met in a secure underground bunker. A dozen men and women sat at a table, their faces illuminated only by the harsh glow of a dozen holoscreens. There were no political parties, no debates about national borders. The human race was on the brink of extinction, and they had no time for anything else. The planet's core was dying, its resources exhausted. Without a drastic solution, humanity's survival seemed impossible. Commander Alex Mercer stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his jaw clenched. He had always been a soldier, a man of action, not words, but today was different. Today, they were asking him to do something he had sworn he would never do. "We have no choice," Counselor Halston's voice crackled through the room's speakers. "We must look to the stars. We can no longer survive on this planet. The time for diplomacy is over. It's time for us to expand." Mercer's eyes narrowed. His military career had been defined by strategy, honor, and defense. The very idea of conquest felt wrong, and yet the Council was insistent. The future of humanity depended on it. What they were proposing wasn't just a move of survival, it was an invasion. The Council's holographic projections flickered to life, revealing an image of a distant star system. A cluster of planets, rich in resources, sat just within reach. According to the latest scans, these planets could sustain human life. The only problem? They were already inhabited by unknown alien species, and Mercer would be the one to lead the charge. "We've identified several worlds that are perfect for colonization," Counselor Mendez continued, ignoring the tension in the room. "But they are not unoccupied. The species living there will fight to keep us out." Mercer's stomach tightened. The implications were clear. A peaceful settlement was no longer a possibility. They were asking him to lead humanity into a galaxy of unknown dangers and other civilizations. The very thought of it made him sick. But Earth had run out of time. The Council had no plan B. "Commander Mercer," Halston's voice sliced through his thoughts. "You've been chosen because you understand the art of war. You've led soldiers into the most dangerous situations and brought them out victorious. You are humanity's last hope." Mercer stood there in silence, his mind whirling. He could already feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, crushing him under its intensity. This wasn't a matter of whether he believed in the mission, he didn't. This was about whether he could survive it. Could humanity? Mercer's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his closest advisor, Lieutenant Karras, who had been silent up until now. "Commander, there is no other option. Earth is dying, and we're the only species capable of saving it. If we don't act now, humanity will be gone." He could feel the weight of her words, the desperation in her tone. It wasn't just a mission anymore. It was their last shot at survival. With a sigh, Mercer met her eyes. She knew the cost of this war. She knew what he would have to do. He turned to the Council. "Give me the fleet. I'll do it. But know this, I'll lead humanity to survive. I will not lead it to conquer." There was a brief moment of hesitation, but the Council nodded in agreement. The decision had been made. The reluctant Conqueror had been chosen. And so, under the dark, oppressive skies of a dying world, humanity's journey into the stars began. The path ahead would be treacherous, uncertain, and filled with enemies, both external and internal. But Mercer knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their soul. And he would do whatever it took to ensure humanity had one left. The fleet departed Earth under a sky that seemed to weep for humanity's future. Mercer's command ship, the Exemplar, cut through the dark void, its sleek hull reflecting the distant stars like a ghost. Behind it, a convoy of military and civilian ships, each one carrying thousands of people, followed in formation. The mission was clear: reach the distant star system, secure a foothold, and begin the process of colonization. But every step forward felt like a step into the unknown. As the fleet neared the star system, Mercer stood in the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the vast emptiness of space. The data streams from his officers pinged in the background, showing progress, scans, and potential targets for exploration. The initial reports were promising: several habitable planets, abundant resources, and most importantly, a chance for humanity to survive. "Commander," Lieutenant Karras said, her voice steady despite the tension that had been growing over the past few days. She stood at his side, her gaze also fixed on the monitors. "We've picked up strange readings. Unknown ships, moving fast. They're not responding to our hails." Mercer frowned. His instincts told him something wasn't right. The fleet had done preliminary scans of the system, but they hadn't accounted for the possibility of alien forces already present. The peaceful nature of the mission was slipping away with every passing second. "Alert the fleet," he ordered, turning toward the communications officer. "Prepare for defensive maneuvers. I want shields up and weapons ready." The officer nodded, tapping a series of commands into his console. For a moment, the hum of the ship's engines was the only sound in the room. The rest of the crew went to work, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Minutes later, the unknown ships appeared on the radar, emerging from the outer planets like phantoms. Their design was unlike anything humanity had encountered: sleek, angular, and menacing. The vessels were clearly warships, and they weren't showing any signs of peaceful intent. Mercer's stomach twisted as he watched the approaching ships grow larger on the display. They were too fast, too organized, for a species that had never encountered humanity before. These ships had been waiting. "Commander, they're charging weapons," Karras shouted, her voice full of urgency. A series of explosions rocked the outer hull of the Exemplar as the alien ships fired without warning. The shockwave reverberated through the command deck, knocking some of the crew off their feet. The fleet responded immediately, firing back with the laser cannons and railguns that were standard on all human ships. But Mercer knew it was too late. This was no simple skirmish. They were being ambushed. Full evasive maneuvers now, Mercer barked. The Exemplar lurched to the side as enemy fire pummeled the shields, sending sparks and bursts of static across the command deck. Karras scrambled to keep her footing, her eyes glued to the display. The fleet was under heavy attack, and the first blood had been spilled. A nearby civilian ship, one of the transport vessels, was hit by a devastating blast. It erupted in a ball of fire, debris scattered into the void like confetti. "Commander," Karras called, a grim expression crossing her face. "The civilians, we need to help them." But Mercer didn't answer right away. His mind raced, calculating their odds. He couldn't afford to lose his fleet, not now, but the lives of those civilians weighed heavily on him. The world outside the command deck felt unreal, as if it had been pulled from a nightmare, and yet he knew it had to be done. "We won't lose any more ships," Mercer said, determination setting in his voice. He punched a command into his console, activating the fleet's hidden countermeasures. "All ships, focus on taking down the enemy's lead ship. We fight to survive. That's our only priority." The battle raged on, every second more intense than the last. Mercer's ship swerved and dodged alien fire, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The crew worked together like a well-oiled machine, their hearts pounding as they fought to defend humanity's last chance at survival. The alien fleet was relentless, but Mercer was no stranger to war. His orders were clear: survive, no matter the cost. The Exemplar cut through the alien ranks, its weapons delivering precise strikes to cripple the enemy ships. One by one, The hostile vessels began to fall back, retreating into the shadowed depths of space. But as the final alien ship disappeared into the void, Mercer couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. "Commander," Kara said, her voice softer now. "We've won, but what now?" Mercer stood in silence, staring out into the dark expanse. They had survived the first battle, but the war was just beginning. And no matter how reluctant he was, there was no escaping the path ahead. Humanity had come to conquer, whether it wanted to or not. Now, Mercer muttered, we find out what we're really made of. The fleet had just tasted the first blood of war. The galaxy, it seemed, would never be the same. The victory over the alien fleet should have been a moment of triumph, but instead it felt hollow. The fleet had suffered heavy casualties, both in ships and crew. The debris of the destroyed transport vessels floated in the silent void, a grim reminder of the lives lost. Mercer stood on the command deck of the Exemplar, staring out into the endless darkness of space, as though searching for something, anything, that could bring him peace. "Commander, we need to regroup," Kara said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. She was standing at his side, her face etched with concern. "The fleet is in disarray. We can't keep pushing forward like this." Mercer knew she was right. The crew was on edge, morale was low, and his officers were beginning to question the cost of their mission. The shock of the ambush was still fresh in their minds, and the sudden shift from exploration to full-scale war had shaken the entire fleet. Mercer, too, felt the weight of what had happened. The planet they'd been hoping to claim for humanity's survival was still in reach, but the alien forces, whoever they were, had proven that they would stop at nothing to defend their territory. The silence in the command room grew heavy as Mercer processed Kara's words. He wanted to do the right thing, wanted to ensure the fleet's survival, but he was growing more and more unsure of what that meant. How far would humanity go to ensure its future? What line would they cross, and who would be left to pay for it? Just as Mercer was about to speak, the doors to the command deck hissed open, and Admiral Tolan stepped inside. His once imposing figure now looked more like a man weighed down by his own doubts. Behind him were several of his senior officers, their faces tight with the tension of the moment. "Commander," Tolan said, his voice grim, "we need to talk. Privately." Mercer nodded, motioning for Karis to stay behind. As the two men walked down the narrow corridor toward Tolan's private quarters, the tension between them was palpable. Tolan had always been a staunch supporter of Mercer's leadership, but something had changed in him after the battle. Mercer could see it in his eyes. Once inside, Tolan wasted no time. "The fleet is divided, Alex. You're not hearing what the others are saying. People are scared. After what we just went through, some of the officers are questioning your decisions. Your reluctance to retaliate in full force has cost us. Some believe we should have destroyed every alien ship, not just forced them to retreat. The galaxy doesn't have room for mercy." Mercer's fists clenched. He could feel the heat of anger rise in his chest, but he held it back. "What are you suggesting, Tolan?" "We need to show strength," Tolan replied, his eyes narrowing. "If we don't, we risk appearing weak. If we don't take a stronger stand now, these alien races will see us as prey. We can't afford that. Not if we're going to survive out here. I've spoken to some of the senior officers, and they agree with me. We need to take the fight to them. Hard." Mercer felt the blood drain from his face. He knew Tolan was a hardliner, but this was different. This was no longer about survival, it was about conquest. "You're talking about turning this into a full-scale war, aren't you?" Tolan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to Mercer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Think about it. We can't go back now. We can't show weakness. The people need to see that we're in control. If we don't act, we lose everything. And if you don't take command of the fleet in the way they expect, you won't have a fleet left to command." Mercer felt the weight of Tolan's words. He knew what was at stake. the survival of the human race, the future of his people. But at what cost? If they pushed too far, if they burned too many bridges, they might not just conquer the stars. They might alienate any hope of peace with the very civilizations they needed to survive. Is that what you really believe? Mercer asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That the only way forward is through total war. That the only thing humanity deserves is victory at any cost. Tullin's eyes hardened. I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm saying it's the way that will work. The galaxy will respect us, or it will fear us. That's the only way we'll survive. The longer you hesitate, the weaker we become. Mercer stood still, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts. He could feel the pull of Toland's logic, the pressure of his officers and the fleet, but his conscience screamed in protest. How many more lives would be lost in the name of survival? How many more innocent people would suffer? Before Mercer could respond, a sharp alarm rang out across the ship, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Commander," a voice shouted over the intercom. "We've detected an incoming fleet, alien ships, much larger than the first group. They're not retreating, they are coming for us." Mercer's heart skipped a beat. The time for hesitation had passed. The battle for humanity's future was about to begin in earnest, and the choices made now would shape the destiny of not only Earth, but the entire galaxy. "Prepare the fleet," Mercer said, his voice cold and decisive. "This time, we fight to win." As the door to the command deck slid open and he rushed back to his post, Mercer couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer leading humanity to survival. He was leading it down a path from which there might be no return. The Exemplar shook under the force of enemy fire as the alien fleet descended upon them with terrifying speed. Mercer stood at the command deck, his fingers gripping the edge of his console. The screens in front of him were filled with flashing red lights and urgent warnings. The enemy ships, massive and foreboding, loomed large in the distance, cutting through the darkness like predators closing in on their prey. "Commander, they're closing fast. Shields are holding, but we can't keep this up much longer." Kara's voice crackled through the chaos, her tone tight with panic. Mercer's eyes flicked to the tactical display, tracking the alien ships as they moved into position. There were far more of them this time, hundreds, maybe thousands. The ships were massive, far larger than anything the humans had encountered so far. Each ship radiated an aura of menace, the dark silhouette of warships outlined by faint, pulsating lights that hinted at their deadly capabilities. "This is it," Mercer muttered under his breath. He knew it was only a matter of time before they would engage in full-scale combat, and with the current state of the fleet, they were barely ready for the battle ahead. His mind raced through the countless strategies he had learned over his career, but nothing could prepare him for the sheer magnitude of this conflict. "Commander," Karis shouted again, her voice more urgent. "We have to make a decision now. We can't afford to wait any longer." Mercer's eyes hardened. He could hear the fear in her voice. The crew was beginning to lose faith. They were being asked to fight against impossible odds. The uneasy truce he had maintained between survival and morality was shattering before him. There was no way around it now. "Prepare for battle," he ordered, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "Get all ships into position. Focus fire on their lead vessel. Karis, ready the boarding teams. We'll take the fight to them up close." Karis hesitated for a split second, but nodded. "Aye, Commander, we'll be ready." The Exemplar lurched violently as the first volley of enemy fire hit their shields. The ship groaned under the strain, and for a moment, Mercer thought they might not make it through. But then, with a roar of engines, they surged forward, following his command. He could see the tactical advantage slipping away. Every shot fired in retaliation seemed less effective than the last. The enemy ships were adapting to their strategy, learning, and the humans were being pushed to the brink. As the fleet engaged in fierce combat, Mercer's mind raced through the orders he had given, constantly adjusting to the changing situation. He watched helplessly as ships from his own fleet were destroyed, explosions rippling across the battlefield. Each loss felt personal, a painful reminder of the cost of this war. "Commander," Karis called, her voice tinged with disbelief, "we're not winning this. They're too strong. We need to retreat or risk losing everything." But Mercer couldn't hear her. His gaze was fixed on the massive alien ship ahead of him, the one that seemed to be leading the charge, a monolith of destruction. They needed to bring it down, fast, or the rest of the fleet would crumble. "This ends now," Mercer growled, his teeth gritted as he slammed his fist down on the control panel. "Lock all weapons on that flagship. Full power." The Exemplar fired with all its might, the energy blasts tearing through the space between them and the alien vessel. For a moment, it seemed as though their attack might have worked. Shields flickered, and the alien ship took damage. But then, with horrifying precision, the alien ship retaliated. A massive beam of energy shot out, hitting the Exemplar square in the side. The ship groaned and alarms blared. The hull buckled as systems failed one after another. "Shields are down. We're taking critical damage," one of the officers yelled as the ship rocked violently. Mercer felt his heart race. "Steady," he commanded, though his own composure was beginning to crack. "Do not falter now. We have to hold on. Karis, get us in close. Prepare to board that ship. This war isn't over yet." Karis nodded, her face pale but determined. "Aye, Commander. We're ready to launch the boarding pods." With a final desperate push, the Exemplar surged forward, the rest of the fleet following suit. The enemy flagship loomed closer, its guns charging for another strike. Mercer knew they had no choice. If they couldn't take out the flagship now, the entire fleet would fall apart. "Fire!" Mercer yelled as the Exemplar released its boarding pods, sending them streaking toward the alien vessel. The crew was already preparing for the next phase, the ground assault. If they couldn't defeat the enemy in space, they would fight them in their own halls. As the boarding pods hurtled toward their target, Mercer took one last look at the battlefield. Ships exploded around him, the void littered with burning wreckage. There was no going back now. With every ship that fell, and with every life lost, the cost of their survival grew heavier. Mercer's hand tightened around the command chair, the weight of leadership pressing down on him. No matter how much he fought, no matter how many victories he claimed, the price of war would always be paid in blood. And as the boarding pods hit the enemy ship, Mercer knew that humanity's future would be shaped by these bloody choices. The reluctant Conqueror had no more choices left, only survival. The Exemplar shuddered as the boarding pods blasted through the dark void, their trajectory aimed squarely at the alien flagship. Mercer could feel the heat of the battle around him as his ship continued to fight off wave after wave of incoming fire. The moment of truth had arrived. Now, the fate of the entire fleet rested on the success of the boarding operation. "Pods are on target," Karis reported from her station, her voice steady despite the chaos. "They've breached the hull. Team Bravo is inside. We're taking the fight to them." Mercer exhaled, trying to focus as the alarms continued to blare. Every moment was filled with the sound of explosions, the violent rattle of the ship's structure under fire, but his mind was fixated on the mission at hand. They had to neutralize the alien flagship from the inside, or all would be lost. The enemy's weapon systems were too advanced, too powerful, and without taking down their command center, there would be no hope of survival. "Lock down all entrances," Mercer ordered. "Ensure the boarding teams are protected at all costs." The ship's AI acknowledged his command, but Mercer could already feel the pressure mounting. His fleet was weakening under the relentless assault, and the tide of battle was shifting. Every minute that passed without solid intel on the flagship's interior felt like an eternity. The fight for Earth's future had become a desperate scramble to gain any advantage. The communications officer suddenly broke through the tension. "Commander, we've intercepted an alien transmission. They're communicating with us. It's not standard radio. We're working on decoding it. Mercer's brow furrowed. Keep me posted, he said, already turning his attention back to the live feed of the boarding operation. He watched as the live feeds from the pods began to come through, showing armored soldiers moving cautiously through the dark, metallic corridors of the alien flagship. Every step was calculated, every corner a potential death trap. The enemy had clearly been prepared for this. There was no such thing as an easy fight now. Report, Mercer demanded. Team Alpha has reached the command center, Kara said, her fingers flying over the console. There's a security system, some kind of energy barrier. They're struggling to bypass it. Override it, Mercer growled, tension making his words sharp. He knew they couldn't afford to waste time. If the aliens regained control of the flagship, all was lost. Moments later, the image on the screen flickered as the door to the command center was blasted open. Team Alpha streamed inside, weapons raised, but the alien command room was eerily silent. The walls pulsed with an unnatural light, and in the center, a series of holographic displays blinked to life, showing maps of the galaxy, alien technology, and coordinates Mercer didn't recognize. The alien presence was overwhelming. Their technology far surpassed anything humanity had yet discovered. Commander, you need to see this, Kara said, her voice taut. The aliens, they weren't just defending their territory. They were tracking us. They've known about humanity for a lot longer than we thought. Mercer's stomach churned. If the alien forces had been tracking Earth, then this wasn't a simple invasion. It was a calculated war, and humanity had been pulled into the crossfire without even realizing it. Are we in control? Mercer asked, trying to maintain focus. Not yet, Karis replied. The flagship is still operational. It's a race against time. The sound of heavy gunfire erupted from the comms, followed by static, and Mercer's heart skipped a beat. The fight inside the flagship was escalating. The boarding team was encountering fierce resistance, and it was clear that the aliens were determined to protect their command center at any cost. Status update. Mercer barked. They're fighting hard, but Kara's voice broke off as the feed from Team Alpha cut out. For a split second, the silence felt suffocating. What happened? Mercer demanded. They've been ambushed. Kara's voice trailed off as the comm scrambled, and another transmission came through. This time, it wasn't from the boarding team, it was from the alien flagship. The alien transmission came through loud and clear, this time with a message in their strange language, followed by a garbled translation. But one word stood out, the meaning unmistakable: defeat. Mercer's gut tightened. This wasn't just a fight for territory. It was a fight for humanity's very existence. The aliens had been prepared for this battle, and the deadly game of cat and mouse they'd been playing was about to escalate. Their message wasn't a threat, it was a declaration of war. Commander, we've got incoming, Karis warned. The flagship's weapon systems are primed. They're charging something big. Before Mercer could respond, a terrifying rumble rocked the ship. The Exemplar was caught in the crossfire as the alien flagship unleashed a devastating energy pulse. The ship lurched, buckling under the force. Systems went offline one by one as lights flickered and alarms screamed in every corner of the ship. Report, Mercer shouted, his voice a commanding roar. The ship is critically damaged, the communications officer replied. Shields down, primary systems offline, but we're still functional. Barely. Karis turned to Mercer, her face filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Commander, we need to finish this. Now, if we don't shut down their command center, we'll all die here. Mercer didn't answer. His thoughts were racing. If they failed here, humanity would be wiped out. But if they succeeded, if they could take control of the alien flagship, it would be their chance to turn the tide of war. Prepare for the final assault, Mercer said, his voice filled with grim resolve. We fight until the end. The fate of humanity and the galaxy itself hung in the balance. The Exemplar shuddered again, another massive blast from the alien flagship, striking the ship's weakened hull. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered once more. Mercer braced himself against the shock, his jaw clenched in frustration. They had been given one chance, one brutal, unforgiving chance, and it was slipping away by the second. "Shields are down to 30%, Commander," Karis reported, her face tight with strain. "We can't keep absorbing this much punishment for much longer." Mercer turned toward the tactical display, his mind racing. The alien flagship was now fully charging its main weapon, an energy pulse so powerful that it could obliterate entire fleets in a single blast. Their only hope was to disable the flagship's weapon systems before it could fire again. But with the ship barely holding together, it seemed like an impossible task. He looked to Karis. "Can we get another boarding team to the flagship now?" Karis nodded quickly, her fingers flying across the console. "We've got one team left, but they're spread thin after the last assault. It's not enough." Mercer knew she was right. The remaining troops were exhausted, and the alien resistance had grown fiercer by the minute. The last push would be their hardest yet, and it was their last shot. "Then we'll have to make it enough," Mercer said, his voice hardening. "Get the team ready. We'll do it ourselves if we have to." Karis hesitated for just a moment, her eyes meeting his. "Are you sure, Commander? It's a suicide mission. We're all stretched thin, and the enemy's getting stronger." Mercer looked at her, seeing the concern in her eyes. He understood her fear. They had all lost comrades along the way. But this was the moment that would decide everything. There was no more room for hesitation. "We've come this far. If we don't fight with everything we've got, we'll lose. This is the only way." Karis didn't argue. She knew as well as he did that sometimes, when the stakes were this high, there was no safe way out. "I'll get the team ready." Mercer turned back to the display, watching as the alien fleet closed in, their ships surrounding the Exemplar like vultures circling a dying prey. If they didn't act now, it was all over. But even as the thoughts raced through his mind, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this war, this conquest, had already cost them too much. He glanced at the small, flickering transmission from the boarding team inside the flagship. The feed was distorted, but the last clear image showed their progress as they neared the central command hub. They were almost there. They had almost reached the heart of the beast. "Commander, we're ready to board," Karis said as she approached, her voice unwavering. "We'll hit them hard and fast. This time, we won't wait." Without another word, Mercer followed her to the boarding pod, the crew's collective energy crackling with anticipation. They had no illusions about what they were about to face. The alien flagship was no longer a foreign vessel, it was a fortress, and the enemy within it was relentless. Inside the pod, the crew was silent. The hum of the engines was the only sound as they shot toward the alien ship's surface. Mercer's mind was focused, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on him like 1,000 tons of steel. Every second counted. The flagship's weapons would fire again soon, and they had to be inside before that happened. As the pod hurtled toward the hull, Mercer could feel the tension building. The pod slammed into the alien ship with a violent thud, and the door exploded outward, revealing the cold, metallic interior of the flagship. The air inside was thick with the aliens' strange energy signatures, and the walls pulsed as though alive. Mercer's team poured out of the pod, weapons raised, ready for the final assault. The alien forces were waiting for them, an elite squad of warriors who had clearly been prepared for this moment. Their weapons crackled with strange energy, and their armor shimmered with a protective sheen. "Push forward," Mercer shouted, his voice cutting through the deafening silence of the battlefield. His team advanced, gunning down the first wave of alien warriors with ruthless precision. But Mercer knew that this wasn't the real fight. The real battle lay ahead, in the heart of the command center, where the alien leadership was waiting. As they pushed deeper into the flagship's labyrinthine corridors, Mercer's heart raced. The walls seemed to close in on them, every turn and every corner hiding potential death. The air grew hotter, heavier, as though the very ship itself was alive, watching them, waiting for them to fail. And then, just as they reached the final corridor leading to the command center, an alien voice echoed through the ship's intercom system. It wasn't a threat or a challenge, it was a command. Leave, now, or perish. Mercer froze. For a moment, the alien voice seemed to hang in the air, mocking them, daring them to continue. But Mercer didn't hesitate. He had come too far to turn back now. He turned to Karis and the others. "This ends today," he said firmly. "We fight for Earth, for the future. We won't let them take that from us." And with that, they charged forward, ready to face whatever horrors lay beyond the doors of the alien command center. The fate of humanity, of the entire galaxy, hung on the edge of this final confrontation. And Mercer knew that this time they would either conquer or fall. There was no middle ground. The doors to the command center of the alien flagship slid open with a low mechanical hiss. The air inside was charged with an unnatural energy, the walls alive with pulsating light and strange symbols that glowed like a warning. Mercer stepped into the heart of the beast, his senses heightened, every nerve on edge. Behind him, his team followed in tight formation, weapons raised, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. For a moment, the room was eerily silent, as though the entire ship was holding its breath. The alien command center was nothing like the human war rooms they had known. There were no screens, no consoles to monitor, only massive crystalline structures embedded in the floor and ceiling, connected by shimmering energy lines that hummed like a living organism. "Stay alert," Mercer whispered, his voice low but firm. He could feel the weight of his words. They were on the edge of something monumental. If they failed here, there would be no second chance. A low rumble echoed through the room, and then, from the shadows, the alien commander stepped forward. The figure was towering, almost 7 feet tall, its form draped in dark, flowing armor that seemed to shimmer with energy. Its face was hidden behind a dark helmet, but its presence radiated power. The creature's eyes, 2 glowing orbs, focused on Mercer with a cold, calculating intensity. "Human," the alien spoke, its voice a guttural growl that reverberated through the chamber. "You dare to challenge us? You are nothing but insects. We are the invincible race. This galaxy belongs to us." Mercer stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. "This galaxy belongs to humanity now. Your invasion ends here." The alien's lips, or what could be called lips, curled into a mocking smile. "You think you have the power to stop us? You think you can control what is ours?" It raised one armored hand, and the room seemed to pulse with a new energy, as though the very air was being charged. Mercer's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel it, the energy in the room shifting, becoming dangerous. The alien was preparing to unleash something powerful. But Mercer couldn't let fear take hold. His team was depending on him. The entire fleet was depending on him. "Take him down," Mercer shouted, and the room erupted into action. The soldiers charged forward, firing their weapons at the alien commander. But the shots barely seemed to touch him. The alien moved with inhuman speed, deflecting the bullets with a shield of energy that shimmered around him. With a flick of his hand, the floor beneath them cracked, and a series of energy barriers shot up, cutting off Mercer's team from the commander. "Foolish humans," the alien mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. "You cannot defeat what is invincible." Mercer gritted his teeth and signaled for his team to spread out. They would need to be smarter than this. Brute force wasn't going to cut it. They had to outmaneuver the alien's powers, exploit the weaknesses in its defenses. He turned to Karis, who was already analyzing the battlefield with sharp eyes. "There's a central core," Karis said, pointing to a glowing energy source at the far end of the room. "It's powering the shield. If we disable that, we can take him down." Mercer nodded. "Cover me," I'm going for the core." Without waiting for further orders, Mercer sprinted toward the glowing core, the energy pulses from the alien's shield and weapons narrowly missing him. The alien commander watched him approach, its eyes burning with rage. But Mercer had no time to stop. The only way they could win this was to disrupt the source of the alien's power. Behind him, Karis and the rest of the team engaged in a fierce battle with the alien warriors who had appeared from the shadows, seemingly summoned by the alien leader's will. Mercer could hear the sound of gunfire and the clash of metal as his team fought for their lives. Each soldier moved with precision, focused on the task at hand, but there was no denying the odds. They were up against a force more powerful than anything they had ever faced. Mercer reached the central core, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the energy emanating from it, pulsating with an intensity that threatened to overload his senses. A series of alien symbols flashed on the surface of the core, and Mercer knew this was it, the moment of truth. He pulled a grenade from his belt, a specialized EMP device, and attached it to the base of the core. It was their best shot at disabling the energy shield. The countdown began. "Mercer." Karis shouted from behind him. "Hurry, we can't hold them off for long." Mercer's fingers trembled as he adjusted the device, but the countdown was already in its final seconds. The alien commander was closing in on him, his energy weapon raised. The air seemed to vibrate with tension, the entire room holding its breath. With a final click, the EMP detonated. The room erupted in a blinding flash of light. The energy barrier around the alien commander flickered, then collapsed entirely. The alien's roar of fury filled the chamber, but it was too late. The EMP had worked. Mercer didn't hesitate. He turned, raising his weapon and firing directly at the alien commander's exposed chest. The shots pierced through the armor, and the creature staggered back, its body writhing in agony. But even as the alien commander fell, Mercer knew this wasn't over. The alien forces were still out there, and the war was far from won. "Is it over?" Karis asked, her voice filled with relief as she rushed toward him, her weapon still ready in case the alien rose again. Mercer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward the flickering holographic map that still hovered in the center of the room. There was more at play here, much more, and he had a sinking feeling that the real battle had only just begun. The alien commander crumpled to the ground, his once imposing form now reduced to a heap of lifeless armor. Mercer stood over him, breathing heavily, his heart still racing from the intensity of the battle. The hum of the room slowly faded as the energy shield around them dissipated, leaving only the echo of the fierce conflict that had just unfolded. Karis approached, her face streaked with sweat and grime, but there was a glint of victory in her eyes. "We did it," she said quietly, but the words felt hollow in the air. They had taken down the leader, but Mercer knew that this was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. "Not yet," Mercer replied, his gaze never leaving the fallen commander. "This battle is over, but the war is far from it." He turned to the others, who were finishing off the last of the alien warriors that had fought alongside the commander. Despite the victory, the gravity of what lay ahead was evident in their faces. This had been a crucial victory, but it wasn't the end. The alien forces were vast, and this invasion was just one wave in a much larger campaign that would continue across the stars unless they found a way to truly end it. Mercer strode toward the alien command center's central holographic console. The crystal structures around it pulsed with alien energy, but now they felt almost lifeless, as if they had lost their connection to the greater power that had once fueled them. He placed his hand on the control panel, trying to make sense of the alien interface. This was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Yet it was also their last hope. The console flared to life under his touch, showing a map of the galaxy, stark, cold, and unforgiving. A series of planets blinked in and out of existence on the map, each marked with symbols that he didn't understand. There was a pattern, though. Something about the positions felt deliberate, coordinated. "Commander," Karras said, interrupting his thoughts, "the rest of the fleet is reporting a major shift. The alien forces are pulling back." Mercer's mind raced. Why? He didn't believe it for a second. Aliens didn't retreat, they only adjusted their strategy. "Get me a direct link to the fleet's commanders. Now." Karras quickly worked her console, connecting to the command channels. The voice of Admiral Reed came through the static. "Commander Mercer, we've got a problem. The alien fleet is retreating, but they're not leaving. They're converging on a single point in deep space. We're tracking something big." Mercer's heart skipped a beat. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Something big. He had been right. The real war wasn't over. If the aliens were pulling back, it meant they were preparing for something far more dangerous than anything they had faced so far. "I'm seeing the same thing," Karras confirmed. "It's not just a fleet. It's a force." Mercer turned back to the holographic map, his eyes scanning the galaxy for any sign of this new threat. The pieces were starting to fall into place. He could sense the strategy, the methodical nature of their enemy. The alien forces had been scattered, testing humanity's defenses. But now they were gathering, and when they did, it would be an all-out assault. He took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "We're not done, not by a long shot." The map on the console flickered again, and Mercer zoomed in on the gathering fleet. It was headed toward the dark reaches of the galaxy, a place even the alien race seemed to fear. There, in the heart of a forgotten nebula, a massive construct loomed, something so large it made the alien flagship they had just defeated look like a speck of dust in comparison. Mercer's eyes widened. That's their final weapon, their home base. "We have to stop them before they can activate it," Karras said, her voice steady. "We can't let them regroup." "No," Mercer replied, his voice hardening with resolve. "This time, we finish it." He turned toward his team. "Prepare for a final assault. We're not just going to stop them. We're going to end this war. Once and for all." The team nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. They had come too far to falter now. Mercer looked back at the console, the alien map glowing in front of him, showing a trail of destruction in its wake. But this time, it wasn't just a map of alien conquest. It was a map of humanity's triumph. "Admiral Reed," Mercer said, his voice steady, "prepare the fleet for a full-scale offensive. We're heading to the nebula. It's time to end this war." The alien threat had been pushed to its limit, but they were still far from broken. Mercer knew what lay ahead would be the hardest fight humanity had ever faced. But for the first time, he felt the undeniable force of hope rising within him. Humanity had won battles before, but this battle, the battle for survival, was the one they would win for the future of the entire galaxy. And it would begin with a single final strike. "Let's take the fight to them," Mercer muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We're not going to stop until they know who we are."